who actually should go to the Supreme Court. Should it be the Ohio Redistricting Commission? Should it be the legislature? So Common Cause and the League and the ACLU are getting together with the kind of top legal experts on redistricting who are knowledgeable about Ohio. And we're going to try to come up with what are exactly our options. One thing that we know for sure is that we need more information. We need there to be public hearings so that the legislature and the Ohio Redistricting Commission can actually start to, think through all of this. What should we do? How can we move the deadline? Moving the deadlines is complicated because everything has to be done in time for elections in 2022. So, and it's a lot of work that has to be done when you redistrict. First of all, you draw the lines, but once you've drawn the lines, candidates have to know what district they live in. They have to live in the districts for a certain period of time. The Board of Elections has to have time to figure out which districts voters are in. Candidates have to have time to collect signatures from voters who are in their same districts. There are a lot of elements that go into it, so it's actually quite tricky to push the deadlines back too far and still have enough time to get everything done by the primary election in 2022, or even by the, even if you push that back, you don't have a lot of flexibility before the November election. But we're working on it, and we'll be updating everybody periodically, about how we move forward. We have some actions. The coalition, which is Fair Districts, and that's the League and Common Cause and ACLU, we wrote a letter to Ohio official map makers about what they should be doing now. I really highly recommend you read the letter because it has a lot of specifics in it about what needs to be done now before we get the census data. We need to wait for the census data, but we need to take action and get prepared so that once that census data arrives, we're fully ready to go. So that means things like having public hearings to figure out the process, figuring out whether we need to move the deadline back, convening the commission. And in order to convene the commission, all the members have to be appointed, etc. So this letter, I highly recommend that you read. It has a lot of information in it about the kind of work that can be done now before we get the census data that has to be done. And then there's two other actions on this page that I would love it if you guys took. One is writing to those map makers and telling them to get to work. And the other is contacting Governor DeWine and asking him to convene the Ohio Redistricting Commission. That's really important, but the commission is the body that will be drawing the Ohio state legislative districts, the Ohio House and the Ohio Senate. And, there's a lot of work that can be done before we get the census data. And once we convene the commission, then they can start to have public hearings. And maybe that body will be the one that has standing to take a petition to the Ohio Supreme Court and say, we need leniency on these deadlines or give us new deadlines. As I said, we're gonna talk with all our legal experts next week, but we think it's pretty likely that the Ohio Redistricting Commission will be the group that goes to the Supreme Court to ask for those changes. Any questions so far about census delay and deadlines and timelines and that kind of thing?
The only question I've got is what size will congressional districts be? What is our 15 into what is our population?
That's a good question. I know that I think it's something like 770, but there's a lot of great redistricting mapping software that's free, and they will automatically, if I go into, I mean, I could go into one right now, or Tiffany could. If you go to Districtor, for example, and you start to draw a congressional map, it'll tell you the target population in each district. So I'm just going to write in the chat the names of three free mapping softwares that are excellent.
I have a question. I'm
Yeah.
Karen. Do you think that DeWine is going to be collaborative on this, or what do you think?
Well, I think he has to start the commission at some point. We got 1,000 people to send emails to Huffman and to their representatives and senators to say, don't go for that hasty constitutional amendment. And then people didn't. So we're feeling a little bit proud and victorious at the moment that we actually managed to get that we got that pushed off. So I think if we send a lot of emails and calls into DeWine, and we have letters to the editor about it, and our public about it, I think that he will be prodded to get to work. Yes, I mean, eventually he does. Obviously, the commission does have to get started at some point. It's really just a question of saying, don't waste time, get to work right away. So Tiffany's got the Dave's redistricting, and the other one is called District Builder, and she can find the thing. So those are mapping softwares that are free, open to the public. They're excellent. And once you say, I want to make a congressional map, and you say 15 districts, it'll tell you that exact number of population that you're aiming for in each one. And I think it's 7 something. Okay, I'm going to go on if that's okay, unless there's other questions, and jump in anytime. So another thing that we're doing at Fair Districts, which is, again, Fair Districts is sort of League of Women Voters, Common Cause, ACLU. We've been distributing these postcards, and on the back of the postcard, it says, Ohioans want fair maps. The 2015 and 2018 reforms passed in all 88 counties by more than 70% of the vote. This is not just 1 or 2 people in Ohio want fair maps. All of Ohio wants fair maps. All of Ohio cares about gerrymandering. And we're sending postcards to map makers to remind them that this is something that, they need to, when they make maps this year, they have to follow not just the law, but the spirit of those reforms. And we've got more than 20,000 cards have been distributed so far, and you can request them at this link. But actually, on this very call, you have Katie Hoffman herself, who is our Cincinnati distributor. And if you need cards from her, you can grab them at you can email her, contact her. And so we've all been working. I got a new batch of postcards. I asked Tiffany to count them out for me. She brought me 1,500 cards yesterday. I packed them up and took them to the post office, and they are on their way to Katie right now. So this is, I feel like we're in family right here, and it's our postcard family that, we're all working together. And the instructions have ideas for things that you can say, but you're also welcome to write whatever makes sense to you. And you don't have to write them this week or tomorrow. You can write them anytime during this map making period, which is really essentially all summer and fall. So don't be shy. Just make sure you really send them. Get them in. We're doing other things. We have a speakers bureau. We have a wonderful person in Cincinnati named Jean Henderson, who's been heading up a regional speakers bureau. You can get involved, which would be great. You can request a presentation. We're also doing community mapping, as I mentioned. And what that is groups coming together and talking about where they live, defining their community, their neighborhood. And then all that information goes together into, it gets kind of aggregated so that we can see, 100 different maps of Cincinnati and Hamilton County and see, where people think that it's important that those lines be drawn. It also prepares people for, it prepares people for speaking at public hearings and being able to talk
He's
about
not here right
their
now, and
neighborhood.
we're on
I'm
a
just
Zoom
gonna-
call, so could you call back later?
There we go. And there's other links here about how to get involved and how to get our emails. So that's all about fair districts. So now I'm going to move on to the bad voting bills. And as Bill mentioned, it's a national trend. There have been terrible bills introduced all across the country. And it's about voter registration. It's about cuts to early voting. It's about absentee ballots. It's all of this is based, 100% directly based on the big lie. And I can't really say, because I can't look into their hearts, but it seems as if some people are just cynical and want people not to vote, and some people perhaps actually believe the big lie. I don't know. It's hard to comprehend. But there's a lot of national groups such as ALEC, but also the Heritage Foundation and a place called the Foundation for Government Accountability that have been waiting to send out voter suppression bills for a long time. And now this is their moment. It's kind of ironic because, of course, we had a really pretty spectacularly good election considering the pandemic. We had high turnout. We had, people had access to early vote, to absentee ballots. And actually that was a pretty successful election considering everything. So over 361 restrictive bills have been introduced since March 24th, all across the country. What about in Ohio? Ohio has had a history of, kind of one step forward, two step back. We have a pretty good system now with no fault absentee and a long early vote period, but we used to have same day registration for a week during that golden week. And of course, we still have large scale voter purges. But let me tell you a little bit about what's going on with an Ohio voting bill. Bill Seitz, I'm sure you all know who he is. We don't have a bill in our hands yet, but there have been numerous drafts of a bill that he is authoring that have circulated. There was a leak, one bill was leaked, and other people have had access to other versions, but it's all been kind of a little bit, nothing official. So everything I say about this bill is tentative because we haven't actually seen the real deal yet. And we thought that we would have it on Monday, and we're not quite sure why we don't have it yet. So it's a little bit mysterious why this bill hasn't dropped yet. Maybe during this, 25 minutes that we've been together, it's been dropped during that time. I don't know. But the problem with Bill Seitz's bill is that it really appears to be something of a Trojan horse. It has some good things that make it easier to vote or make our elections better, but those are masking a lot of things that make it more difficult to vote. So some of the restrictions include things like instead of having an absentee ballot deadline that's 3 days before the election, it moves back to 10 days before the election. It removes the Monday before election day for early voting. And 30,000 Ohioans vote on that Monday, usually more than 30,000. It tightens ID requirements for absentee voting. So you'd have to have 2 forms of ID, and many people don't have that second form of ID. It restricts the use of drop boxes to on-site at boards of elections, and they would only be able to be used for the 10 days prior to the election. It does some other things, some other bad things, but it also has a few good things. So until we actually see the bill, it's a little bit hard to judge, whether it's better or worse. One thing I can tell you for sure is that there's no, if what you're trying to do is improve elections in Ohio, there is no need for you to include the voter suppressive elements. There's no need to say that drop boxes only can be used for 10 days. Why? They're safe, they're secure, they're already there. Boards of elections, some boards of elections have been using them for 10 years. And all this does is prevent an already existing thing from being used. It doesn't really make any sense. So we've been waiting for a few weeks now to actually see this bill. We're a little bit scared because there are rumors about an even worse bill coming from the Senate. The rumor is that Bill Seitz is working with the Heritage Foundation, but that Senator Wiggum is working with the Foundation for Government Accountability. And that group has been pushing voter suppression bills across the country, which have things like you need to, any application for absentee ballot needs to be notarized. You know, that is just craziness. And the truth is that, you know, in their heart of hearts, they really don't want absentee ballots or early voting. And Bill Seitz said that himself in one of those pieces that I think Tiffany has dropped in there. He's quoted as saying, in 21 years I've been in the Ohio House and Senate, the worst thing I ever did was vote for no fault absentee voting and early vote period. So he doesn't, you know, he's saying straight up that he actually doesn't want people to be able to vote other than in person on election day. Clearly that's something we don't support. More information about, you know, it's easy to make a better voting bill, more drop boxes, more early voting locations. We don't need any of these restrictions. The people who will be impacted as usual, Black and brown people, seniors, active military, folks who are struggling economically, you know, folks who will have difficulty getting time off work to go to vote early, et cetera. So it's the same folks who will be impacted. Sorry, this is, so we have started at the Ohio Voter Rights Campaign Coalition. We started a campaign to try to get businesses to step up and say that they do not support voter suppression bills and that they support democracy, they support access to the ballot. And one group that has stepped up is called the Columbus Partnership. It's kind of the bigwigs in Columbus business, including Jenny's. And their president, Alex Fisher, wrote an op-ed in the Dispatch last week in which he called for, you know, basically improved access to the ballot and spoke out against any attempts to limit access to the ballot. So we do have a campaign. Sorry, I'm going to skip through some of these because otherwise I'm going to go on too long. Whoops, sorry. And voters absolutely support, you know, businesses supporting access to the ballot. So we have a lot of things that we can do to support good voting bills and be against bad voting bills. We have an action which is sending an email to your legislator saying, you know, support access to the ballot, don't support bad election bills. We have an organizational sign-on. So if you're a member of any group, we would love for you to sign that so we can have a long list of organizations that support pro-democracy access to the ballot. And we have a corporate accountability campaign, which is businesses saying that they support access to the ballot. And we would love it if you know, own a business or you patronize a business or you know someone who owns a business, if you can share these links with them. I think that's, yeah. So any questions about the voting bills or voting access before we go on to the next bill?
One issue that bothers me restricting early voting and that kind of thing, I don't know whether it's just true of Hamilton County, but we seem to be losing places to vote on election day. It used to be you could even walk to your polling place from your neighborhood, or it was right in your neighborhood. Today, sometimes you have to drive 5 miles to get to your place to vote. So is that happening in other counties across Ohio as well?
That's a really good question. I can find out the answer for you. I don't know definitively right now, but it would be easy to find out a list of polling places. There definitely has been some polling place consolidation. Usually that happens. I mean, we tend to see that more in, you know, neighborhoods with a lot of people of color or poorer neighborhoods. There tends to be polling place consolidation. But I can find out like raw numbers, how many polling places Ohio has now compared to, let's say, 10 or 15 years ago. Because that is a concern for sure. A lot of people want to vote on election day, and we want them to be able to vote conveniently and easily on election day as well. One thing that we're pushing for, that the Secretary of State says that he supports, and the elections officials definitely support, is multiple early vote locations per county. There's no reason for there just to be one. Whether you're in a very populous county, which means long, long lines, or you're just in a rural county where you may be an hour drive away from your Board of Elections, it makes sense to have more than one early vote location. But I think, any other questions?
Yeah, Mia, I have a question. LaRose was talking to the League of Women Voters here in Cincinnati. He seemed rather reasonable. Do you work with him, and do the bills that come from the legislature trump what he would advocate, or do they work together?
That's a great question. And a little bit of a complicated one. LaRose does not have a lot of support in the legislature. He's a part of he's a Republican, and it's a Republican majority, but a lot of lawmakers were very, very, very angry at him when he changed the primary date last year. Well, he didn't do it. The Amy Acton, the health director said we have to stop the election, and then the governor put out a thing. But everybody was mad at LaRose, and he kind of has a reputation in the legislature of being a little bit, not being hard line enough. And so LaRose has a habit of talking about reforms in a very, rational and supportive way. He wants online absentee ballots. He wants automatic voter registration. He wants multiple early vote locations. And he says all those things. But then when an opportunity comes for him to demonstrate to his caucus that he's a hardliner, he will happily jump and take that opportunity. So he both tweeted support of that letter that I mentioned that came from the business partnership in Ohio. Frank LaRose tweeted support for that letter. But at the same time, he's spoken out and said that Bill Seitz's bill is great and it's wonderful. So he's, on the one hand, he says, Ohio had a great election. We're showing the nation the way to go. Everybody look to Ohio for the way to do it. And then he supports an election bill which would make substantial changes in the wrong direction in Ohio. So, it's always a little bit of like whiplash when you hear what he says and then you kind of see what he does, because he's had so many opportunities he's also afraid of the legislature. So, the courts ruled that he had the power to say that there could be more than one drop box per county. But he was afraid to do that without permission from the legislature, so he declined to do it. So is he a great advocate for voting rights? Not really. He may sound like it sometimes, but in practicality, does he actually do those things? Not so much. That's my opinion. Any other questions, or I'll go on to our next item. I think we're running out of time, so I'll quickly talk to you about SB 80 and Senate Bill 80 and House Bill 149. So Senate Bill 80 passed 2 weeks ago, and House Bill 149 is yet to pass. And what it does is I'm including this because I just think this is so corrupt. I really do. We already have a system in Ohio where judges have party labels during the primary, and then they have no party labels in the general election. Those party labels just magically disappear, and nobody's associated with the party anymore. And so there's these bills would say that the Supreme Court and the appellate courts would have party labels, but the county and municipal races would not have them. And the calculus is here that in very populous counties and municipal races, like in Hamilton County and Franklin County and Cuyahoga County, it will benefit the Republicans if party label is not included. But on statewide races, for the Supreme Court, et cetera, it will benefit the Republicans if the party label is included. All the judges have come out and said, this is a travesty. It's ridiculous. It's shameful. We don't want it. And yet it passed easily in the Senate and presumably will pass in the House as well. And there's no intellectually honest justification for wanting party labels on some kinds of races and not on other kinds of races. So, I urge you to write a letter to your legislators about it, write a letter to the editor. I wrote an op-ed piece that is supposed to be published in the Toledo Blade, but I don't know exactly when. I'm happy to share it with you, but this is just nonsense. And judicial races are, they're important, and we should get them right. So whether you think that labels should always be on or should never be on, there's no reason to want half and half. And finally, House Bill 13. I was hoping Catherine would magically appear to talk to you about.
And she did.
Oh, she did. Look at that. That is so funny. All right, I hand it over to you.
All right. Well, hi, everybody. So many of us have been waiting since, July of last year when Householder was arrested and some of his cronies were arrested. And then we finally had, folks pleading guilty. And in fact, Generation Now or the representative of the corporation also pled guilty. Sadly, Neil Clark committed suicide. So what was supposition and arrests have slowly become much, much clearer exactly what happened. And, yes, a section of House Bill 6 has been repealed, but not all of it. And they haven't done anything to ensure that it doesn't happen again. They haven't done the kind of transparency pieces that they need to do. But I did want to tell you about House Bill 13, which is in the Ohio House. It's sponsored by Representative Diane Grindell, and what it does is it requires the disclosure of any independent expenditures, and it basically expands what they call political contributing entities and says, hey, you actually spend in elections. We deserve to know who is funding you. Now, the thing that I wanted to highlight that I think is extremely important is that it doesn't at the moment, although I do believe the sponsor is amenable to this, and there seems to be interest in the committee about this, it doesn't include anti-coordination rules. And you might say, well, I don't exactly understand anti-coordination. They're supposed to be independent expenditures. When Citizens United came down, the decision really focused on the notion that independent expenditures were independent of candidates. So they can't be corrupting because they're independent of candidates. Except for we all know that these political advertisements, the fundraising is actually coordinated with candidates. And we don't have good rules, certainly at the federal level, but we do not have good rules at the state level. And the reason we know that we don't have good rules at the state level isn't just, okay, kind of putting together, connecting the dots. We do know that Governor DeWine actually asked First Energy to do an independent expenditure on his daughter's behalf, because there are no rules about a family member asking a corporation to run a political advertisement. And so we need to make sure that there is a buffer between candidates and the corporate spending on political advertisements. And so we're really encouraging people to take action and say, yes, we so support good disclosure of political advertisements, but that's just one part of the problem. The next part of the problem is we actually need to ensure that candidates aren't coordinating with these political ads. And so, you know, there are lots of times that I am guardedly hopeful. We should consider the legislature slow and hard to work with, but there does seem to be some real interest at this point on doing something to shine a light on dark money. We just need to put a little bit more pressure on. And with that, I'll ask for the next slide. I did want to highlight, you know, before we said goodbye, that there are things that are happening at the federal level that are really exciting, and so that we shouldn't forget that. So there's the For the People's Act, which addresses a bunch of different, what we would think of as democracy things. So everything from automatic voter registration and shining a light on dark money, or getting at those dark money ads, public financing of elections. It also includes everything from like the president or presidential candidates must file their tax returns. There are rules that strengthen lobbying. So it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that to improve the rules surrounding our elections and our democracy. You know, I would highly urge all of us, if we have a chance, to send an email, send a letter, make a call to Rob Portman's office, letting him know that you support the For the People's Act. We know made its way through Congress. Senate is a much tougher kettle of fish. You'll notice that I did not mention Sherrod Brown. The reason I didn't mention Sherrod Brown is he's actually a co-sponsor. So if you're going to send a note to Sherrod Brown, you can say thank you and highlight that you're very supportive, and then send a note to Rob Portman saying, hey, these kind of stronger rules will encourage us to have the robust democracy that we all hope for. And then the next thing I wanted to highlight to you, and Mia, if you'll go to the next one, is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which I think is super important. Many of us will be aware that the Voting Rights Act included a section called Section 5. And so this is the Voting Rights Act of 1965. A few years ago, the US Supreme Court said it wasn't necessary anymore to have pre-clearance. And basically that meant that the Justice Department was no longer reviewing the changes that states were making on voting access. And we know that almost immediately after, all of a sudden, we weren't having the kind of good voting rules that we needed. Now, Section 5 does not affect Ohio, but it's really important for us to consider, especially our southern neighbors. Now, I included this slide because I just like the notion that there's a day of action, which is coming up soon. Tiffany's going to throw information about that in the chat. So if you want to participate in the day of action, I would highly encourage. It's May 8th. And with that, Mia, is this the last slide? There's additional resources. Do you want to tell them about that?
Yes, I do. So we'll send you these slides, and there's just some, more links with more actions. I'm sure you have more than enough there, but another thing that we've been trying to push for is the ability to have virtual testimony. I don't know if you all saw the hilarious thing on Twitter, which was my Ohio Senator, Andrew Brenner, who was driving while in a committee hearing on Zoom, and he put a background of his office, but he had a seatbelt on, and you could see when he came to an intersection and was looking to see whether he was going to turn. So he felt fine. He said there was no problem with him participating in a committee hearing while driving, but there is no way for folks who are not able or do not want to go to the State House to participate in committee hearings. And we're particularly eager to have the hearings be accessible to all when it comes to redistricting. It's going to be very important for everyone to be able to participate. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then, you know, if folks have questions for me or for Catherine, we are very happy to answer.
Yeah, let's open it up. Questions about any of these issues. One thing that we didn't go into in redistricting, of course, we passed two different constitutional amendments, 2015 and 2018. And even though they are both reform issues, they're both slightly different processes. How do we as citizens hook up with you and the league to get in both these? One is dealing with congressional redistricting, the other is dealing with the state representation. So both are going to be taking place, obviously, with different processes.
Yes, definitely. Well, the first thing you should do is make sure, and I'm sure many of you are, but make sure you're getting you're on our email list so that you're getting updates from fair districts. I'm about to send an update in about 5 minutes. I'm going to send an update to everyone on the list. So sign up. I think Tiffany put that in the chat somewhere, and she can probably put it on again. And we have a speakers bureau, which we have, you know, people are getting involved and talking about redistricting with their neighbors and their friends and their organizations. We have, you know, there's always a need for people to be contacting their representatives, to be writing letters to the editor, to be speaking out about the importance of fair maps. There are going to be all kinds of, we are ordering yard signs. They're wonderful. They say it's time for fair maps and gerrymandering now. And we hope to have those spread out across the entire state. We should be getting those in about 2 weeks. And so you'll be hearing from us with how you get yourself a yard sign. We'll be looking for someone in the Cincinnati area, perhaps associated with the league or otherwise, who'd be willing to you know, have a stash of them in their garage and you know, distribute them. We'll have kind of little regional distribution centers. So that would be a great way to be helpful to us. And really there's, you know, you can donate to fair districts. I mean, I hate asking for money, but the truth is that we, you know, as far as postcards, yard signs, staff time, there's a lot of things that we're all kind of pushed to the limit. So if you can chip in and help us, you know, spread out our actions, that would be really helpful as well. So many ways to be involved.
And I was going back to what Bill was saying about kind of the state legislative maps versus the congressional maps. I do think one of the things that can happen is we all get obsessed with just the congressional map making. And at the end of the day, making sure that we have good state legislative districts is so essential. If you think about the kind of very important decisions that our state legislature could be making and focused on, you know, having really good maps for an entire decade for that is really important because those districts are smaller. So that 99 and, you know, 99 House districts and 33 Ohio Senate districts. The focus is really on keeping, first of all, counties whole, cities whole, townships whole. But of course, based on population, there are going to need to be some, you know, some divisions. And so one of the things that we really are doing right now, and I think is really helpful, is focusing on what we call community mapping. So one of the things you should all be thinking about it, whether it's this this group of folks that do a community mapping session or other organizations that do a community mapping session, the idea is to get together and have a conversation about how you see your community so that we can all go and testify and give information to map makers so they understand, okay, if I have to keep a township whole, but we have enough population, there's enough population for an Ohio House seat, like where should that line be, and like how should that work? These are the kinds of tools that we didn't have 10 years ago. So we are so blessed. We have not just new good rules, but we also have new tools. And so I would highly encourage you all to participate in a community mapping session.
Yep. And yeah, sorry, Bill, go ahead.
No, I was just looking for other questions. Yeah, I think that was important to bring up, Catherine, because we do have these two different process from the two different amendments. And this is why a session like this, to my way of thinking, is so important, because a lot of us don't really get adequate information unless we're tuned in. I get Common Cause's emails and what's going on, but we don't get very good news coverage about, especially what's happening at the legislative level, state legislature level. So sometimes we're about a month behind and we learn that something's happened at the state, but it's too late for us to do anything. So that's why these things are so critical, to keep in touch with.